Hello and happy Monday to everyone. Today I'm going to have a lovely chat with Victoria Cunningham, my friend who is the founder of Stretch Body Mind and the creator of Stretch and Play. And Victoria, here she is, just joined, is all about movement and mindfulness and how we can use yoga and other techniques to really... So hopefully Victoria's going to join any minute. There she is. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. It's wet and warm in Glasgow today, which is not pleasant. It's a bad combination.
Yeah, it's that kind of stickiness, isn't it?
And it sort of feels a bit like November, even though it's July. So typical summer holiday weather. So the Scottish holidays have started already, school holidays. So
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it's nice and bright and sunny here today, but I was literally just speaking to someone in South Africa, and she was saying, oh, it looks like you've had such gorgeous weather. And I was saying, it really feels like 4 seasons in one day, some of the days at the minute. It's nuts.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's just a typical summer in the UK. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I'm so glad that we're jumping on here today. I do have to say, real life, my little one is off nursery with a cough and a cold, so she's napping at the minute. But if there's any crying, I might have to dash. So just letting you know.
That's the realities, isn't it?
That is the reality. But hopefully we should be good. I've been really looking forward to chatting with you because I've heard kind of bits and pieces around your work and your kind of journey to where you are now. But I'd love to kind of just hear more and really go back to the beginning perhaps around before we talk about Stretch and Play specifically, how did you kind of get into yoga and movement, and how did this become your business?
Okay, so we have to go way back into the annals of time for this one. Some people may recognize the accent. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and I actually started to practice yoga when I was 13 years old. I found a book in the library and I was like, I want to do this, which my mother found amazing because I didn't like sport. I didn't like any other activity, but suddenly I was like, yes, I want to do yoga. And then when I was 16, she allowed me to go to the local technical college to go to night class to do yoga. And at this time, we're still talking late 80s, early 90s. So Madonna hadn't made it popular at that stage. And it was like me and a pile of ladies from the Women's Institute. I was like the youngest by about 40 years, but I just loved it. And it really helped me with my GCSEs and my A-levels. It just helped with, I was quite an anxious child, so it really helped to deal with exam stress. And I remember in sort of my last class before I went to university, my teacher saying to me, you could be a yoga teacher. And I was like, yeah, right. I'm going to go and get a real job, Yeah. So this was not expected. This was not what I had planned. But basically, I went to university, practiced yoga again a little bit on and off during those years, and then went traveling, moved to Vancouver. And when I was in Vancouver, I discovered a style of yoga called Kundalini, which is very, let's just say, hippy dippy. At that stage again, we're talking, I think it was 2000, the year 2000. So it was, yoga itself was still quite in its infancy, but certainly Kundalini yoga was seen as really cult-like in some ways. But I fell in love with it. I just thought it was fantastic. And I began to train as a yoga teacher. And then what happened was I lived in an ashram. We were allowed a call once a week, and I got called into the office early and I was like, there's something wrong. And my mum had discovered that she had breast cancer. So I ended up leaving Canada and moving home to look after mum. She's fine now, like she's been in remission for years, so she's doing really well. But basically I went from being immersed in this yoga culture to coming home to Northern Ireland, where it was like no, you know, yoga, that's not appropriate. We don't want to hear about that. No, no, no. But I still wanted to practice, and I still wanted to teach. So I started to teach, but it was more hatha yoga, which is just the more physical postures. So I was doing that. At the same time, once mum started to get better, I looked for a job, and I ended up getting a job as a youth worker. So I ended up that I worked in youth work for probably around about 4 years, youth and community work. And I, at that stage, was like, I would love to combine my youth work with my yoga. And especially because the youth work that I was doing was with older kids. So it was sort of 16 to 25-year-olds. And a lot of them had children of their own. And for them, as, you know, young adults, it was almost as if it was too late. And I was seeing those bad behaviours being repeated. I always remember going into one of my young people's houses, and her, you know, she was like 22, her child was 7, and her child standing holding the phone and saying, "Mum, what will I get for dinner tonight? Will it be pizza or Chinese or chips?" And, you know, that's how the little girl got dinner. She didn't go to the kitchen and cook something, phone something. And it was just like, you know, these children are going to end up just replicating the, you know, the bad health choices that their parents are making. And so I decided to it was around about 2005, and I thought, right, I'm going to do it. So I quit my job, and in January 2006 I launched Stretch and Play, and I registered it as a charity because the work that we were doing was very much around raising self-esteem and addressing rising obesity levels, particularly in deprived areas of Northern Ireland. And again, it was 2006, so that would have been classed as a post-Troubles society. But what is interesting about any sort of war or any sort of community trauma is that I would say, like, we're in 2021 now, and we're still in a post-Troubles Northern Ireland. Peace was declared in 1998, but the Troubles themselves started in 1969. So they say that, you know, we had 30 years of war, and for those 30 years, we're going to need probably 90 years in order to get over that community trauma and intergenerational trauma and things like that. So at the time there was a lot of money being thrown at Northern Ireland to try and help them and lift them out of this, but what I did was really, really unique. And in fact, again, there was quite a lot of, because I was calling it, I was like, yes, I'll call it children's yoga. And I remember one venue said, we won't have parents signing up for this. In fact, we could have pickets outside because, you know, yoga is so frowned upon. We couldn't have this with our children. What is it that you do exactly? And I said, well, we do stretches. They're not all yoga stretches. Some are based on pilates and some are just general stretches. And we play games, and we play, you know, we do, you know, songs and exercises, and they were like, well, just call it that. So that's where Stretch and Play came from. So I've never credited the girl that said it, but she probably should have got some money.
There's so much to unpack here. It's fascinating. You're like this early pioneer, because I was trying to think, I think maybe we're a similar age, and certainly when I was a teenager, we weren't doing yoga in the early 90s. And so I'm trying to kind of pinpoint, when did that tip into the mainstream? And so you were like this pioneer of doing yoga anyway, and I loved it. It's, you know, from a library book that says it all. It wasn't even online at that point. And then you're kind of going through and spending his time with maybe a more established community, perhaps, during your time in Vancouver, and then coming back. What was the horror? Like, why was yoga a dirty word in your community in Northern Ireland? What was the issue around that?
I think because it was so alien. And I remember one of the sports clubs, which was a private golf club and, you know, and gym, they invited me in, and they were like, look, we are a Christian establishment, and because of that, we won't have any mention, any singing, any foreign language, and it just, I mean, I think because Northern Ireland is so caught up in its own sectarianism around two parts of Christianity, the thought of having Hinduism in it or Buddhism in it or any other religion was very scary. So, and it took a lot to say, well, actually, it's not like that. It's movement and breathing. It's, you know, I'm not going to say any foreign words or, you know, so I had to let go of a lot of the Kundalini stuff. I had to release a lot of that because it is quite esoteric and probably would have freaked a lot of people out.
Or any of that, that component,
Yeah. So, so I just went from like, okay, right, we just don't do that. We just do the physical part because that's still so beneficial.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm saying that, like, again, when I started to teach yoga, it was 2001. So, 20 years ago, things were a little bit different. Now, yes, Northern Ireland is a lot more open to it. And actually, I always found the Republic of Ireland to be more open to it than Northern Ireland, which was strange. But again, I do think it's a legacy of the Troubles and just the sort of very narrow-minded attitude that used to be quite prevalent at that time. And I mean, moving to Scotland, sometimes you would have got the same sort of attitude, but generally not as much.
So you recognise this opportunity through your youth work and youth engagement, that it sounds like there are two things you were particularly noticing around trauma and childhood obesity. And it's interesting that I think sometimes we don't think that childhood obesity is like a mental health or symptomatic of mental health issues. It can just be seen as, well, we're eating too much or not moving enough. So what were some of the experiences you were seeing that made it very clear to you that childhood obesity does kind of fall within mental and emotional well-being?
I think it's really more with all the research that's coming out now on adverse childhood experiences, which you will have heard about before and which you'll continue to talk about a lot more because this is something that's really new. Well, particularly in the UK, it's quite new. We're like looking at this, and what adverse childhood experiences is where children's experience of life is not as it should be. So there may be certain aspects of life that cause developmental trauma, and part of growing up with these inconsistencies, health inequalities, and lack of ability to get on in society.
Thrive.
It not only leads to issues that start in childhood, but those issues continue throughout adulthood. And one of them is, I think you had a speaker on a few weeks ago about trauma, and she was talking about any of the isms, alcoholism, even workaholism is I guess like a sort of feature of
a byproduct.
how you deal with these adverse childhood experiences. And for a lot of children, it starts with poor food choices and overeating and eating convenience foods. And then it goes on to early experimentation with cigarettes, with alcohol, with other drugs. And then it goes on to domestic violence and incarceration and early death for some. It can be that serious. But it starts a lot of the times with giving a kid, a Mars bar or a packet of crisps. So,
I mean, this situation isn't improving. I mean, you and I were just messaging earlier, and I wrote a recent blog piece about the fact the UK government's talking about, or they are going to start regularly weighing primary school children from September as a response to the continued spike in childhood obesity. I mean, there's so many things wrong with that. But if you were kind of noticing this really happening 15 years ago, and things are only getting worse, I mean, what in your opinion should we be doing instead of weighing children every week?
Well, We should be offering healthy school meals. We should be encouraging parents to shop healthier and educating them as well about how to cook, because that's a big thing. I think we often, it's a generation of adults who don't know how to cook for themselves and therefore don't know how to keep their children healthy either. And it's interesting. In Scotland, we do have a thing called the Best Start. It's a bit like the Sure Start grant, but it's the Scottish version of it. Scotland always likes to have its own version of things, but they also have a Best Food grant. And if you are in receipt of certain benefits, then they give you vouchers so that you can actually buy healthy food, which is, I think that's a much more proactive response than, to me, weighing children is very reactive, reactionary, and really quite punitive in a way. It's not the children's fault that they are the way they are. It's, it's society at large. And actually, if we look at it, it's also decreased activity, because we've been in a lockdown for 15 months, and parents have suddenly had to work from home and homeschool at the same time, and you're allowed out for, an hour of physical activity a day. But not everybody was taking advantage of that. If you're having to work from home, then you're just going to say, do you know what, watch the TV or play on the PlayStation or whatever it is. And I mean, that was happening. I think our lack of activity, we've become increasingly sedentary over the last 15, 20 years. And this has only exacerbated it.
Of course. And like with most things, like I kind of was talking about this, it's like we have the longest cheat day ever. We're all feeling sad, scared, this collective trauma that you talk about. And one of the things that we do is, overeat sometimes, or, I think we're seeing the figures for Deliveroo orders kind of going through the roof, and it's kind of not surprising. So I think you're right about the weighing in being reactionary and it's kind of knee-jerk, rather than let's just take a breath, and kind of have a think about what are some of the more kind of longer term and more positive approaches. Because one of the things I'm concerned about when I read initiatives like that is around the fat shaming that's happening already, or the kind of the body comparison that kids are experiencing already, so it's happening before. So kind of creating this unsafe, like psychologically unsafe experience within school really doesn't help.
And not to mention the fact that when I started Stretch and Play, a lot of the schools were getting rid of the compulsory PE classes, so they were bringing me in as sort of after school activity or as a PE alternative, because it was no longer expected that, that primary school teachers had to teach physical education. So how can they make that rule and then suddenly go, well, now we need to weigh all the children because, they're not been active enough? Well, hold on a minute. Actually, let's go back a step. But yeah.
I was having a conversation with Mimi Nicklin, who I spoke to on here recently. She's empathy champion, and she's British but currently based in Sri Lanka. So she was asking me this question around, are schools in England and Scotland and Wales, are they doing more around yoga and mindfulness? And I'm certainly hearing reports of some schools that are, but what's your experience of that?
I would say yes, they're a lot more open to it. When I started, I ran Stretch and Play as a charity from 2006 until 2009. And at the time, I really wanted to change policy. That did not happen because the schools were not ready for it. Now, even though I've been in Scotland since 2012, I still get inquiries from Northern Ireland schools asking, can I go in? And I'm like, no, because I don't live there anymore. But I think that's great that they're starting to be a lot more open to it. I did do a project with an organisation called, at the time they were called the Ulster Cancer Foundation. They're now called Cancer Focus. Mm-hmm. Hold on a second, I think that's my postman. Isn't it always the way?
There's always something.
We're fine. Oh dear, they always call when you're doing something. So apologies. Yeah, so I was doing this project in 2007 with the Ulster Cancer Foundation, because part of their remit was, again, addressing rising obesity levels and increasing sedentary lifestyles, and how that was having an impact on the number of cancers people were having as adults. So they asked me to develop a self-esteem module, they called it, and it was for the classroom, so the teacher could teach the moves to the kids, which was lovely. And that project actually ran for 6 years in primary schools throughout Northern Ireland, and I'm really proud of that. That's one of my sort of proudest achievements, that the work of Stretch and Play, and even though it's no longer running this project, there's still some teachers who still use those moves in their classrooms, which I think is fantastic. So I do think there's definitely more openness to this in schools, and not just because it's possibly a PE alternative, but also because it addresses these adverse childhood experiences. It helps children to express themselves more. It allows them to be more creative. It allows them to have embodied movement so that they can release trauma that they didn't know they had. It's always been one of those things that I find interesting when I go into sort of my own journey. I felt like I started it because of what I was seeing, but actually I think I started Stretch and Play for the child that I was, and for the trauma that I experienced as a child, because like so many children of my generation, growing up in the Troubles meant that, we saw death and destruction, and it was close to family, and it was very hard. And for me, my particular trauma is that my uncle was killed 2 weeks before my 8th birthday. So to have something happen in those first 7 years of life is, it stays with you forever, and I didn't realize it was a trauma thing because I didn't know anything about that. I just remember I was of the age where I understood what was going on. Unlike my sister, who was slightly younger, she wasn't really addressing it in the same way. But also, I was a child, so I wasn't involved in anything. We were taken away from the family, and we were looked after by neighbours while the funeral happened and all of that. And it was just this. For me, actually, it was the death of my childhood. I didn't get to have a birthday party then for like 4 years afterwards, because every year, oh, we're so sad,
Right.
This is the anniversary of your uncle's death. And it was, so that was, a difficult trauma that I had at such an early age. And then it led to, for me, personally, a diagnosis of bipolar disorder when I moved into adulthood. So, so I'm dealing with a mental health disorder that probably happened because of unresolved trauma in my early years. And I think that I probably started Stretch and Play to ensure that other children didn't go through that same thing, or that, because we can't do anything about the events. I think that's, again, another thing that your past speaker mentioned about, it's not the event itself, it's how you react to it. So two people can witness the same event and have completely different responses to it. And I know that there's lots of things going on for kids, but for me, Stretch and Play was always about allowing them to be, one, the active participant in the story. So they got to express themselves, and two, they got to move, but in a non-competitive way. And that was really important for me, because I think, again, it brings us back to the sort of body shaming and just the competitive nature of life for kids now. The reality is a lot of them are going to after school activities that are incredibly focused towards an end goal.
And a specific outcome.
Yes, and not just move about, jump about, have fun, chat.
For movement's sake. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I'm really aligned, because we haven't spoken about this, But that's, you know, how I feel about Happy Marlo, when people kind of talk about, oh, you know, you're developing this because of my young daughter. And really, it's my response to healing my inner child. And again, recognizing the experiences that I went during those formative years, being a small child, went into adolescence. And I think you often can see that with people who are kind of doing mission-led or heart-focused work, that it often does come back to their experiences and their story.
Very much so. And it's, I think there's something as well very healing about, for me on a personal level, there was something really healing about being able to do that. One of the things that has happened with the charity, it's part of the reason why it's no longer a charity, is that when I was running it for those three years, actually, I think I was the only person who viewed it as a charity, and I did a lot of the mistakes that entrepreneurs make and that I'd advise you against right now, which was I didn't take a wage, I overgave, I undercharged, I had very little boundaries. I remember I took a stretch and play session on, a 30-minute stretch and play session that took me over an hour to drive to, and in Northern Ireland you don't drive over an hour to go somewhere. Like, this was ridiculous. But I was like, I was so proud of myself that I was doing this session, but it took me 3 hours to deliver a 30-minute session, really, by the time I'd spoken, you know, and it was things like that. And I basically, I worked myself into a breakdown. And so it was like, okay, so when the doctors had signed me off sick, you know, they gave me this diagnosis of bipolar. The management committee decided, right, we can't run this without Victoria because she really is the energy that spearheads this. So I stopped teaching the kids stuff for a good couple of years, and I just focused on adults. And it was really interesting because children are so intuitive, and they would say to me, "You're sad today," and I was like, "No, I'm not, I'm fine." You know? And whereas the adults are so in their own head that they didn't notice how unwell I was as I taught my classes. And it did take me, it was sort of scary to go back into it. And what I ended up doing actually was, instead I consulted with other people while they developed their children's qualification.
Right. Yeah.
And so I've done some work with that. And then really, I suppose it was probably about 4 years ago, maybe more, someone was like, "No, I think you need to bring it back." And particularly, this was a woman I was working with who was training Pilates instructors. And she said, "You know, we have a lot of children's yoga, but what you have is different because it has something that would appeal to Pilates instructors."
Right.
Because when you're teaching Pilates, I don't know if you've been to a Pilates class, but it's very serious, you know, it's all very serious. And a lot of the Pilates instructors did not know how to work with children or how to change what they were doing to make it more child friendly. So I changed the name of it to Stretch and Play Pilates and Yoga, rather than just being kids yoga. It's Pilates and yoga for kids. So then I developed a training. So instead of me working with the kids, I was bringing it out to mostly Pilates instructors, then back to yoga teachers as well. Then people from nursery schools, primary schools started to contact me. And then last year, obviously, with everything that had happened, I just said, "You know what, I'm going to put this online." So it's an online self-paced course. It is accredited if you're a yoga teacher or a Pilates instructor or a fitness instructor and want to get accreditation. But if you're just a parent who wants to have some tools to address the anxiety that their child is going through as they come out of lockdown into real life again, you can still do that training, and you get access to the materials, and any updates that I do, you get that for life. So, and that felt great. That just felt, again, like I'm allowing people, I'm not having to spearhead everything.
Yeah.
I'm allowing people to take it in their community and do with it what they want.
Yeah.
It's not like, I know there's a lot of children's yoga programs that are effectively franchises. So you're buying the name, you're buying the materials, but you're also paying in for an annual, you know, sort of
Kind of licensing. Yeah.
Yeah. But I didn't want that. I never wanted that. Even when Stretch and Play was a charity and I trained facilitators, it was more of a social enterprise. That's how we won awards, because it was this social enterprise, and what we were doing was helping people in their own communities to create their own programs. Some of them call it Stretch and Play, and some people don't. You know, they're allowed to call it what they want. I've not held any. I don't want to hold on to the reins anymore. I want to let it
kind of go out and be in the world. I mean, it sounds great that there's this opportunity if you are a yoga instructor and this appeals to you, that, as you said, you can have this accredited training, but equally someone like me who isn't a yoga instructor and isn't very good at yoga, it sounds like I could go through this process and still find some movement and some play. And I love the sound that there's games, and I think you maybe mentioned, did you say singing, or am I just hoping that there's singing?
No, there are a lot of songs. It works with kids aged 3 to 13. But the sort of the 3 to 6 age group, very different activities that I've put in there. And then you've got your sort of 6 to 9-year-olds, and then sort of 10 to 13-year-olds. It becomes less singing and more game playing. But it's a lot of like drama games and those sort of activities to encourage creativity and encourage children to speak out a lot more. Because I think for a lot of them, it's interesting, you know, that you can tell, like sometimes I would go into schools and they would, because it was a PE alternative, they would put the fat kids in the class. Oh, these are the ones that don't play rugby, so we're going to put them in with you. And actually, they were the kids that were like the most sensitive, the most creative, the most engaged, because it wasn't, they weren't being denigrated by their teacher or their peers. They were allowed to just express themselves however they wanted. And it really made a difference. And but it was interesting to see those inequalities happening at such an early age.
Yeah, I mean, again, just speaking personally, it feels like there's such room for this, because I hated sports at school and PE because I wasn't very good at it. And I, you know, coming in last at cross country and being picked last for the team. And so that's had an effect on me as an adult, that it's not natural or easy for me or enjoyable to do physical activity. I see my friend Joe is here. Hi, Joe, who knows all about this because we work out together sometimes in the park. But what you're describing sounds like something I would fully want to be involved with and have as an option. And it's not competitive. It's just encouraging, you know, young people, children to move in a way that feels good to them and fun. So I think it sounds incredible. And I also think it sounds like there's a possibility for a nice Happy Marlo Stretch and Play partnership, which I
think so.
At some point.
I think you'd love it. I think it works so well, because that's one of the things that I don't have in, which I would love, is the tapping, because I think it's great. And it just, when I developed the materials, tapping didn't really exist as a, or certainly it wasn't very well known. And I love that you do that. You know, I think, I think there could definitely be ways that we could work together. I think you'd love it.
So in the meantime, if anyone is watching and they want to find out more, where should we send them to? Where should they come?
I will give you a link that you can put in, so it'll tell you more about the program, or they could check out my main website, because in my main job now, I don't just do Stretch and Play training, but I train people to become yoga teachers, Pilates instructors, and meditation teachers for adults. And so that's through my company, Stretch Body Mind. And you can find things out through stretchbodymind.com. And it lists all my different training courses, and all of them are online right now. So it was something I had been playing with online stuff for about maybe 2 years before lockdown, and I had my own like studio in the background, never used it. You know, I'd paid for all this software and was like, and thank God that I had it, because then I was able to just dive right in and make sure, because at the time of lockdown last year, I had 5 live in-person trainings happening. And yoga is, you know, it's a 10-month course, or it was whenever we were doing it live, and Pilates was over 5 months. So, you know, it was a long drawn out course, and we had to flip and pivot and change everything to online. And then I enjoyed the yoga online so much that I actually then ran an entirely online training at the end of last year into the start of this year. And it was great. It was interesting because we got people from the very north of Scotland right down to the south of England, which they never would have been together if we'd been in person. Yeah. But the fact that we got to work together, and we all were friends, you know, they're still WhatsApping each other at least once a week, you know, even though we're 3 months down the line now and they're out there teaching, but they're supporting each other. And I just thought that was great. I have a lot of time for online stuff. I know some people are feeling stressed by it and fatigued by it.
Yeah.
But for me, I think there's a lot of convenience, particularly for parents. You no longer have to get your children minded. You can do the training in the times that suit you and in those little gaps of time. So, for example, I'm training a woman to become a yoga teacher on a one-to-one basis. Her child is 3 months old and she's breastfeeding. And because I got a lot of pre-recorded materials, she just goes on while she's breastfeeding baby and watches some things. And then I meet her at times that are convenient for her, which are usually sort of late evenings during the week. Whereas if she'd been in a face-to-face training, she would have had to be there on a Saturday or a Sunday during the day and get her children looked after. And she's 8 of them. So it's quite a lot of kids to get looked after.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we've all learned, haven't we, over this past year, 18 months, that technology has really enabled us to stay connected and provides more flexibility and provides more accessibility to a lot of these different things. So I'm really pleased that you've been able to leverage that and that your business has continued during this time, and means that you can reach more and more people in what you're doing.
Yeah. Because the stretch and play is interesting, because I wasn't when it was in person, I wasn't really promoting it. I was just going to certain yoga studios or Pilates studios and delivering it if they asked me to, or going into schools and delivering it if they asked me to, but not actively promoting it. And it was like, why not? The fact is, people need this stuff now more than ever. So So I'm thrilled that I can offer it to anyone wherever they are in the world.
Wonderful, wonderful work, Victoria. I'd encourage anyone who is interested in this, whether it's a yoga instructor, a parent, or teachers, schools, to get in touch and see how they can bring stretch and play to the young children in their communities. It's been wonderful speaking to you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
And I will speak to you soon.
Okay, lots of love.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.